Well, then let's start at the beginning. Now, of course, Mr. Hammond recommended us to you because you two worked together. He didn't want to. He said he was sort of out of the field now.
Yeah, we've been friends for a long time, since the early '70s, when we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was interacting a lot with Ed Mitchell and then with David and his partner, and all those folks.
Were you at Berkeley as well?
I was at Stanford. I was a Stanford professor from '64 till '98.
Wow.
And because of the inner work, after reading the book Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, I had this compelling internal question: how might the universe be constructed to allow this crazy seeming kind of stuff naturally coexist with the orthodox science I was doing with my PhD students every day?
Right. What field of science were you working in?
I'm a physicist by background in the area of materials.
Materials.
So it was material science, eventually became material science and engineering, because it's in the School of Engineering at Stanford.
Right. And did you go over to nanotech?
No, basically I had my own internal guidance about that. There were lots of people doing that. But basically, I was department chair in the 1960s, which was very useful because of the meditation practice. I found it useful in dealing with both faculty and with students,
Is that right?
and in consulting to be able to nourish people and sort of sample their mindsets, and therefore be able to have meaningful dialogues with them. That was very helpful.
Nice way of saying dealing with inner office politics?
No, I've never been much of a politician. My feeling was that the strength of any organization is always in the people. If you build the people, they will create whatever is needed to make the organization great. That's always been my view.
Right.
And but back to this question. What finally I decided, I was on a sabbatical in Oxford at the time to do a couple of conventional science books, and kept getting distracted by this question, and decided to heck with those books. I will leave them till another time, and I will try to answer that question. And the way I went about answering the question was, my wife and I meditated daily for about an hour. We had that practice, and we did that in England.
And silent meditation or chants?
Silent.
Yeah.
And would hold the brick of the question in the meditation for that time period, and would come out of meditation with some aspect of enlightenment on the question. We'd talk about it a little bit, because her perceptions were different than mine, and she's not a scientist. And then I would go upstairs to my study, and I'd work all day on those bits of enlightenment, seeing if they violated any experimental science that had been published in the world. I didn't care so much about theories, other than my own, but in principle, truth is in the experimental data. It's the interpretation where you can go wrong. And by the end of the day, I'd have a bunch of other questions. And so I would go into meditation the next morning, holding the brick of these questions, and did this every day for 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, I had a beginning model that would allow me to explain how orthodox science could be seamlessly joined with this other level of nature, this other level of science. Because it does come down to another level of nature. And it's one unrecognized by orthodox science. Orthodox science doesn't really seek truth about nature. It seeks internal self-consistency with respect to a reference frame that they hold about nature.
And that reference frame has come from what?
That reference frame has come from the study of space and time.
Right.
And the unstated assumption since the days of Descartes by orthodox science has been that no human qualities of consciousness, intention, emotion, mind, or spirit can significantly influence a well-designed target experiment in physical reality. Now the issue is this other aspect of reality does not, the phenomena are not distance and time phenomena.
Right.
Therefore, the paradigm cannot deal with them in any way. Quantum mechanics, relativity theory can't touch anything to do with consciousness because it's not a time-space subject.
Phenomena, right.
Or phenomena. And once you see that, you realize that nature is so much more, and you have to be willing to expand your paradigm, your reference frame for viewing nature. Because the phenomena, you're interested in parapsychology
Right.
and such. That's why you went to talk to David. That whole class of phenomena is in a domain of nature. It's real, vital,
Right.
important, but it's not distance-time dependent. And therefore, orthodox science must cast it out because it's not internally self-consistent with their reference frame
But
and
I
what
thought-
they're dealing with.
In the field of quantum mechanics, as we go forward, isn't that time dimension thing collapsing in it?
I have a Russian friend who has a good word for that. It's called bullshitsky. The issue is you just got to go back to the issue of Schrodinger wave equation, okay, which deals with the wave function, all right, is a second order differential equation in distance and time.
Right.
And all the phenomena, and many, many phenomena, that orthodox science has studied and studied well with quantum mechanics has dealt with the Schrodinger wave equation, distance and time phenomena.
Right.
But if you're dealing with a class of phenomena which is not dependent upon distance and maybe not upon time, or not the way we see time, then the very foundation of quantum mechanics can't deal with it. And one has got to come to accept that. You see, there's nothing wrong with what science has done, but they're limited, and they're now stuck in distance time. They cannot allow themselves to deal with categories of phenomena that are not distance time related, and they don't even realize that. They automatically think everything is distance time related.
Right. In that time,
Right,
it's a linear
right,
regression.
because that's the way they look at this world.
But isn't that how we all experience that?
No, not if you expand your perception and you start to seriously think about it. Your response mechanisms will be distance time for the first 10 years.
First 10 years.
Yes, of trying to deal with this stuff.
Okay.
And then you begin to see that no, it's a different category of stuff entirely. And not to be confused with distance and time. And we see entanglements in our experiments over 6,000 miles. We see entanglements in time,
Right.
phenomena ahead of time.
You mean time jumps? Or time
Yes.
shifts? In these experiments?
Experiments of data appear in our general experimental run before we're aware we're going to do that experiment,
What?
consciously aware.
Really? How does that manifest itself? Is it
It just shows up in the experimental data,
in the computer itself?
in
like
the in the
database?
computer data and the experimental stuff.
You'll see
We'll see information that is not internally self-consistent with time-dependent phenomena.
Right.
Okay, just as we have entanglement, we do many experiments in various places on this site, and we can have a phenomena going on in one place, and 100 yards away, we see a response in a computer that's related to that experiment, not the one that's being run by that computer.
Wow.
It's a very complicated business, very interesting business. It's another level of reality, and it will be a future reality. There's a whole class of phenomena, new science, there'll be new technologies, and it's difficult because you're dealing with human consciousness, human biofields, you're dealing with phenomena that appear to function in another reference frame than distance time.
And that reference frame has to be communal, doesn't it?
It's connected.
It's connected.
There's a connectedness about this kind of thing.
Right.
The connectedness couples people. It couples people and things. It couples things and things,
Right.
etc. We have found over the last decade, maybe a little more, that there are two general states of physical reality. There's our normal one, the electric atom molecule one, and that's the distance-time related phenomena.
Are three-dimensional.
Yes. The other one appears to function in the physical vacuum, and the physical vacuum occupies the space within the fundamental particles that make up the electric atoms and molecules.
Ah.
So it's also in outer space, of course, but the really key place is that it functions there, and it goes faster than the velocity of light, which you can show mathematically. We can't, normal equipment in our normal world cannot access that, but with the use of consciousness, which we've shown experimentally, you can begin to access this other level of reality, and you can bring about what we call a coupled state. And the coupled state is a higher, it's called electromagnetic gauge symmetry state of the very space. It conditions the space. And the space phenomena occur there differently.
So you use consciousness as a measuring gauge for that.
We use consciousness as a vehicle.
Ah.
We imprinted, see, from the unstated assumption of science, that's impossible, okay? Experiments in the past, you could take some very advanced yogis and they could produce phenomena.
Right.
But in general, people are not reliable on a day-to-day basis. So what we did to introduce consciousness to 4 target experiments, well-designed target experiments, we imprinted consciousness into a little electronic box.
Wow.
And then we used the electronic box. We switched it on in a space where we were gathering background data, experimental data, and it had a specific intention in the box.
The box itself. So the consciousness imprinted into the box.
We did it from a deep meditative state, 4 people. And we've done it with 6, we've done it with 2. My wife and I were 2 to imprint our laboratory here.
And you imprinted
years
an
ago.
intention.
An intention into a little simple electronic device. It's the kind of thing that you could get at Radio Shack in the 1950s.
And it could record the electromagnetic.
It would be a host for it.
I see.
Okay?
Okay.
It is not electromagnetic energy.
Right.
And the way we showed that was after we had imprinted a device. We have an unimprinted device and an imprinted device. We could separate them by 100 meters, turn them off electrically, and just to see what would happen. And in 3 to 5 days, the unimprinted device picked up the imprint. Okay?
Wow.
And it could influence an experiment just the way this other one could.
Right.
But the boxes were off electrically. So there was no information transfer via electromagnetic radiation that we know of.
Right.
Right.
So therefore,
there has to be another communication channel in the universe that orthodox science is not aware of.
right. And so with your experiments,
We then developed theories, but basically I had the theories, or expanded the theories all the time.
right.
When I came back from England after having done this inner work and came to the awareness that this was much more important to humanity than the work I was doing at Stanford, I decided I had to keep my day job, but I could get rid of my government committee work and my professional committee work, and I could give up being department chair, which I did. And then I used that time in 3 ways. Continued experiential development of self, that was a third of the time, that's very important. Second, continuing the theoretical development to understand how these two could be connected. And third, to do experiments to keep the theory honest and just keep pushing the envelope.
Right.
And I've been doing that since 1970.
And, wow. Well, keeping this theory honest,
Yes.
is there this idea of consciousness then.
Right.
You bring somebody into imprint, if they haven't been in a meditative state or had a
They would have
40-year practice.
they would have trouble, but everybody has consciousness. To me, and there is a dictionary version of awareness, awakeness, so on. That's trivial. It's true, but it's trivial. My own working hypothesis is that consciousness is a byproduct of spirit entering dense matter. And spirit can only enter dense matter if one does work on themselves, inner work, to build infrastructure into self.
Right.
And as you build infrastructure into self, more spirit enters, therefore more consciousness exists within you, and you become aware of things you were never aware of before.
Right.
And then you do more work on yourself, and you become more conscious, and you unfold step by step.
Right.
All of us have within us the capability of doing that. All of us have the infrastructure. Our experiments show, I can relate how and why, but they show that the human acupuncture meridian system is already at the coupled state of physical reality, which means that humans using unconscious intentions or conscious intentions can move qi. Qi in my modeling is magnetoelectric energy. It's the counterpart of electromagnetic. It comes from the higher gauge symmetry state. Human biofield builds this space around them.
Right.
It becomes a sacred space, becomes them. I suppose it is the kind of things that regular practitioners built over centuries in various cathedrals.
The Shaolin monks or
Yes.
Tibetan.
These things are all real physical realities. They are all capable, and every human is capable of building themselves to that. As they start to practice this and really work on it, they move from a normal individual to an adept, continuing. They move from an adept to a master, and ultimately from a master to an avatar. They become, as all of us will become. But it's an internal process.
And it's internal work required.
Its internal work is required. You get nothing of value for nothing.
Right. That seems problematic in our culture today.
And it is problematic in our culture today, because our culture, in fact, makes it a very, very noisy place, a very, very shallow place, a very, very non-reflective place, very, very almost non-thinking place, etc.
Taken down for you or handed to you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So then keeping this, following this idea of honesty then in the theory.
Integrity, really.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So is there times in this research that it's gone off the path then? Or has it just been a linear progression?
It's been a progression, but the experimental data has shown us that our ideas are not full enough, that we don't know enough, and we have to think a little harder about what those experiments mean within the framework of our experimental research versus space-time experimental research.
I see.
Yeah.
So this is the idea that I have a waking dream.
Yeah, exactly.
It
is, the data is there, and how the heck can you explain it?
Right.
Even with the model. And so it takes inner work and reflection, and an expansion of theory develops, and that's perhaps what it means. Let's do another experiment to test that out.
Right.
And it's step by step by step by step by step.
But does this then get to interpretation?
It always gets into interpretation. You cannot help that.
Right.
And the interpretation depends upon your clarity, your integrity, your honesty, and your willingness to be wrong.
And I would think it's also subjective to the individual.
It is subjective,
Yeah.
exactly. But we're all subjective. All of science is subjective.
But isn't there a universal truth that science is going for?
Perhaps the universal truth is what makes us subjective.
Okay, you just blew my mind.
I mean, perhaps we are part of this universal process, and our awareness is related to what's going on out there, or what we think is out there.
Right. And so therefore...
Therefore, changes that occur there, changes also occur within us. There are two, from the data Well, let me give you an example.
Right.
About 1980, when people did, in the medical community, did double-blind randomized trial experiments, the placebo effect was almost zero. Okay?
Right.
By 2000, it was about 75%.
Yeah.
Why did that happen?
Good question.
Is something going on in the universe that produces a kind of coupling, like what we see in our experiments? Okay? So that it brings connectivity to develop between things? Are these things in the same time frame? Astronomers began to see attractors that they called dark matter and dark energy, and then they began to see acceleration out of the edge of the evolving cosmos, with the planets accelerating instead of decelerating, which is what they should do if we only have one aspect of gravity, if we only have one reference frame, distance time.
Right.
However, those things can be explained by the modeling that I use to explain this other class of phenomena. So they happen out there in nature naturally. We experimentally do them by pumping the system with our consciousness.
Right.
Now that's analogous to what we did back in the 60s to lift atomic energy states to higher states, so that if for the right atom or molecule set, they would flash down, they would drop down, and you'd have a laser beam go shooting out. And then we found those kinds of phenomena in nature as well.
And you can do that through conscious thought.
No, well, we didn't do that through conscious thought. They did that experimentally. They used flash lamps for that.
Okay.
I don't know if you could, you probably, well, if you're developed enough, yes, I think you could do it.
Right.
But it takes a bunch. We can do all things, ultimately, as humans. As humans, we become the receptacle of everything. I look at this outside of us as just a classroom, created for our development. We are the product of the process. We're not aware of it, but we are the product of the process, and we're built by the process. But we have free will, and we choose our process.
Therein lies the...
Yes, indeed. We choose what to believe in, what not to believe in, what to test. I'm fond of saying, if you don't see the traps in life, you have to go through the crap until you see the traps. Because you've decided that's your only teacher.
Right.
I mean, if you're not going to really think and reflect about things, then this is nature. This is why it takes such a long time for humans to evolve.
Because we prefer the crap, or prefer the...
The unreflected life we prefer.
Why is that? Less work?
Well, less work. It's laziness, not caring, not understanding, and having been taught to believe that humans have no capability. We're just meat. Our consciousness cannot influence a target experiment. But there's all kinds of data to show that that's not correct.
Right, right. I believe our
I'd
cameraman
like
has
to
a
throw
question.
in one thing, and
as if I asked it.
And it goes back to something you were saying at the beginning when you were talking about your personal biography and of building people within the department.
Yes.
And traditional science approaches. What struck me was something not just true of science, but of people overall, which is anything that does not easily fit within whatever paradigm we hold.
Yes.
It is our instinct or our reaction to dismiss.
Right.
Well, and let's address that, because there has been some work. There's been a book written by a man by the name of a Dane, name of Tor Noratrander, called The User's Illusion, Cutting Consciousness Down to Size. And one of the important things I found there was the awareness that the human unconscious is about 1 million times the information handling capacity of the human conscious. Human conscious is less than 50 bits per second, whereas the unconscious is more like 50 million bits. Just at the 5 physical senses level. Nothing deeper than that, just at that level.
Really?
And what the unconscious, so unconscious is doing all of the work.
Right.
It's gathering all the information, it's processing it, it's doing all kinds of things, and it feeds little kernels of information to the conscious, but of a size that the conscious can digest, so it can have an experience in life, an awareness.
Right.
But if the unconscious has not given meaning to certain things. If the conscious has not given meaning to it, then the unconscious will not wrap those up in kernels to send to the conscious. So it's like a filter that an individual does on their own unconsciously, and so they only become conscious of things as they give meaning to them.
I see. So without that meaning, then all of that unconscious process just evaporates?
Well, or it's dumped or whatever. I have no idea.
Right.
But that's the way it seems, and we've all had experiences of that in our life, within ourselves, within others. A number of people at a table observing some data, they all see it a little differently because of their own, what has become hardwiring.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
You're probably familiar with the work of Slater in the 30s with respect to the upside-down glasses.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a very interesting experiment, because here's an experiment in which the man creates glasses in which you put on and you see things upside down. And that, of course, is very strange for individuals. But if they keep the glasses on, then after the order of 2 to 3 weeks, suddenly flip, with the glasses on, they see everything right side up. Because the people believe that others should be walking right side up.
Right.
And then if you take the glasses off after you've made that, we'll call it perhaps the beginning of infrastructure development in yourself. If you take the glasses off, flip, you see things upside down. Because you've created what appears to be an inversion mirror somewhere in the brain structure.
Right. It's rewired itself.
It's to a degree. Probably very, well, we know it's fragile. And so if you leave the glasses off for the order of 2 to 3 weeks, and it's different, the timing for different individuals, but flip, you see everything right side up again. So it appeared almost as if the human unconsciously built infrastructure and then unconsciously dissipated that infrastructure.
As needed.
As needed.
Right. So then that can technically, are you finding that in your experiments here?
Well, I think it happens in all of our lives. What we give meaning to, we become.
I see.
And the more in experiments, the more you condition a space with your meaning, the more it becomes.
But then isn't that an arbitrary application?
Of course it is. But
So-
that's what our growth is. That's why our potential is so great.
But then we go back to then there's no universal truth.
Oh, that isn't necessarily true.
Oh, okay.
But the truth might be very flexible.
Ah, well, now I like that.
I mean, the issue, a baby has a kind of truth with what it plays with. Because what it plays with builds its brain. We know that. But the truth of that baby is not the same as the truth of a professor in this world. And to me, we're all just babes crawling across the floor of the universe. We've hardly begun the great adventure. So now imagine, way down the path of evolution, what you call truth can be very, very different than what we would call truth. And even if someone put into our brain consciousness of truth, we wouldn't understand it, because we would have to interpret it with our very weak brain,
I see.
etc.
Right.
So if you carry that further forward, you begin to see that truth can only be relative. Just like orthodox science, which deals with truth and has the belief that there's nothing beyond distance time.
Right.
And the velocity of light is our limitation. And 400 years or so ago, the theocrats who were in power and had hubris, they said, we don't need to look through the telescope of Galileo because we know the truth.
Right.
Right?
Right. It's here. Huh. Well, no, that's fascinating. So if this flexible truth, then if you're finding...
No, there's relative truth. Relative truth.
Right.
Because we don't understand. We're still babies. We're hardly evolved at all.
Well, that's shocking.
It's wonderful, because it means that the adventure is huge. that's before us.
Oh, well, that's good. That is optimistic.
And it's our choice. We have free will. That's why this classroom is here for us, to grow.
So our unconsciousness has the ability to build that infrastructure to allow this growth?
Absolutely.
Oh.
And everyone has, as I said, the acupuncture meridian chakra system has that capability. It's in every one of us. It appears to be in all vertebrates, what little I know of that. Wow. Certainly certain animals. But it's there. It's there for us, and it's there for us, all of us, to become the avatars. The Christ that we think of as, Krishna, Melchizedek, Moses, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Buddha, Jesus, Mohammed, Abdu'l-Baha, etc. These are just those who walked before us.
Now, are you finding with your work that you're butting up against orthodox? Is there backlash that you've felt? Or?
Of course, there's always backlash. When you're trying to walk a different path, or you're trying to create a different path, or you're trying to talk about something that doesn't fit into their internal self-consistency picture.
Mm-hmm. And how do you defend or...
If I would love to have a real discussion. There's never a serious discussion, because their minds cannot accept the information. It boggles their mind. When they look at our experiments, their eyes start spinning and they sort of lose consciousness. If they really pay attention to the data, they can't handle it because they're in violation of internal self-consistency, which they've held truth. It's very difficult for them. Very, very difficult.
I imagine. So have you never been invited to a physics conference of any sort?
No, not to talk about this topic. I've had lots of it in my orthodox science.
Right, of material
Yeah, I mean, I've done, sure. Things that fit within that box.
But you've never brought up this inside of those?
I've tried at times, but it doesn't really get... So I just go on gathering the data and writing books and writing white papers and other papers, and leave a trail that future people can follow.
Throw in my madness for a second. Whenever a big wind comes up, all of a sudden I go, spirit has and what we were talking about here seems to be, whether it be scientists or people or institutions.
Exactly.
Economic.
It's all the same.
Inability to hold the tension of opposites.
Yes.
That whenever, what we were talking about after visiting the Institute of Noetic Sciences, that whenever information comes forward that is counter, that is opposite, that cannot be held, it's not cut out,
not internally self-consistent.
Whatever, it's not internally self-consistent. But the unconscious will keep bringing it forward,
if you give it meaning.
Until such time as that tension. So what's interesting,
but it's a slow process
to me, and you can play with this however you want to, but as he was speaking and the wind was coming up, and you're asking about the resistance, it seems that Bill himself is just able to hold the tension of this opposite. And these people...
Right. And it's very much, so with the wind, I mean, it may be true, it may not be true, but the issue is, it's very much like what we see in our experimental data, that the unseen provides a body of data which we don't understand suddenly.
Right.
Okay? But we have to have developed the openness to say, truth is in the experimental data. Let me think about this. Let me reflect upon this. How can this be? What is its meaning to us?
And so therefore, if you're open, then all things
may happen
and may have meaning, or you
may have meaning, exactly.
So the wind blowing and that butterfly flying, and all of these things then manifest themselves into the experience.
They're all possibilities, and if you're open to the possibility, and if you're open to the data being where the answers are, where what you call truth is, it's the interpretation of that we call truth, but it is not truth. It is just relative truth.
Right.
Because it depends upon our level of development.
So then will we one day evolve to the point where there will be a single universal truth?
I think when we, I've talked about this in my books, and the pre-physical and the physical, which is the lowest level of consciousness, and ultimately the post-physical, back to the unseen, and eventually to the all. And if there's truth, it'll be there. Everything else will be relative truth, because the all contains everything.
Right. So
At many dimensions beyond our cognitive awareness,
so
and our tools for accessing nature.
right, because we are limited in a three-dimensional structure, or are we?
We are cognitively aware of a three-dimensional structure. We are not limited by a three-dimensional structure.
Oh, that's good to know.
The more you develop yourself, the more you become aware of the higher dimensional structures of nature.
Oh, so I can exist in that,
Yes.
even within this three-dimensional
There's
realm.
lots of data that people can commune one with the other and have awareness of more than one,
Right.
and awareness of more than one simultaneously. There's
yet
lots of data.
This seems to be contradictory. It's almost like, as you said, Schrodinger's
Well,
cat.
because the point is, if you're stuck in distance time and you unconsciously think that that's all there is, and therefore for have an internal self-consistency in your life, that's all you can accept, well, that's all there is. The rest of it doesn't exist.
That seems rather sad, actually.
It is sad.
Yeah.
It is. But we're just still children. Children do that all the time.
Limit themselves
Of course.
to their
Yeah.
experience.
Their
that they have.
fear or whatever. Yeah.
So have you experienced fear then in this work? Have you-
Yes, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, an aspect of fear. But I work on not being fearful about it, because the work is more important than that.
So you see the work as outside of...
The work is I see the work as an expression of love.
Oh, that's rare coming from a scientist.
Well, it shouldn't be.
Yeah, but it's nice to hear.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we are. We're all part of a larger one. And we're brothers and sisters to each other.
Right.
And we're students and teachers to each other.
Hmm.
I mean, our strength is in our diversity.
Wow. So then it sounds like you don't even need the realm of science to take you to this next level.
Well, no, it's important. Look, since the days of there's always been a reference frame. The theocrats, there's an important point, and the important point is that when there is an establishment who have a way of looking at nature, and they have described it and prescribed it, they develop hubris. And Orthodox science today has the same kind of hubris that the priests had in the days of Galileo.
Wow.
And the priests in Galileo's day couldn't see the truth until the experimental data slowly changed that.
Right.
Same thing today. It's a very human thing, very human thing. We have to outgrow it, but we haven't outgrown it.
Because, I mean, Galileo represented a new phenomena with technology.
Right,
Right?
right.
So the
And
telescope-
with a new mindset,
Right.
a new way of looking at nature, a new way of expressing nature.
Yeah.
But it was just sort of a kind of beginning.
Right.
And you make errors, and you correct errors, and you move on, and you become more, and then you become more. And of course, following Galileo came Newton, and out of Newton and the others around came all the technology
Right.
and our present science. It built on the shoulders of others, always trying to understand more and to be internally self-consistent. And there's been a body of data for at least 150 years having to do with another aspect of nature, the things that people have called parapsychology. I call it psychoenergetics.
Right.
And because it involves aspects of the psyche, and aspects, higher dimensional aspects of ourselves.
Right. And the energy that comes from that. Is it an energy field?
Of course, there's generally always energy relationships or information relationships. Okay? Let me give you an example. 3 kinds of medicine. Take a glass of water, put some bacteria in it, and then sprinkle some silver colloidal particles, very, very small particles, bigger than nano, but pretty small. It kills the bacteria. And that, people took the idea, oh, you have to have physical contact of the silver with the bacteria, and that kills them, and that's what led to chemical medicine, which was thought to be that you have to have the chemical there to do this inside yourself.
Right.
However, more recently, if you take a fluorescent tube and you make the electrodes out of silver and you ignite a discharge and take the output light and you shine it on this glass of water with bacteria, you kill the bacteria.
Same way.
Yeah, so it isn't physical contact, but it looks like it's at least 1 or more photons within the natural silver spectrum that kill the bacteria. However, we sit in meditation and we can imprint into this simple electrical device an intention to kill the bacteria. We haven't done this experiment, but we could do that experiment and then just flip it on and it will kill the bacteria. The first one led to chemical medicine. The second one leads to energy medicine.
Right.
The third one leads to information medicine.
Wow. So this seems like a breakthrough.
It is. Of course it is. But people have to become aware of it. It is possible to change our reality, to create whole new industries, to create whole new aspects of science, to go beyond the velocity of light, to do all kinds of things. At this point in time, it's necessary to pump the space out of ourselves.
Pump the space out of ourselves.
Lift it by, there are pumper-uppers in this life and there are drainer-downers. And if more people want to be pumper-uppers and really work on themselves, to build infrastructure in themselves, then that which will eventually come will come more quickly. Because we create the domain in which these things can happen. We become co-creators.
Do you sell T-shirts that say I'm a pumper-upper?
That's a good idea. Anyway, my main working hypothesis is that we are all spirits having a physical experience as we ride the river of life together. Our spiritual parents dressed us in these bio-body suits, put us in this playpen that we call a universe, in order to grow in coherence, in order to develop our gifts of intentionality, and in order to become what we were intended to become, which is co-creators with our spiritual parents. Now, what does it mean to be coherent? You probably know it, but let me just remind you. If you take a 60-watt light bulb, for example, it gives a bit of light, not a lot of light. And the reason it's not a lot of light is because the photons come out of phase with each other and they cancel. It's called destructive interference.
Right.
However, if you could arrange one way or another for each photon to come out riding on the back of each other so that they were in phase, then the energy density coming out of that light bulb from the same number of photons would probably be something like 50 to 100 times the surface of the sun. That's the latent capacity that's in that incandescent light bulb.
Wow.
Okay?
Right.
If you look, yeah, go ahead.
But the alignment of that
It's got to be in phase.
in phase.
Yeah, that's coherent. So that's what we are about here, is to become coherent. You first have to become aware of it.
Aware of it.
And then you build infrastructure into yourself and you become coherent.
Wow.
And then the gifts of intentionality. From our experiments, by intending out of a meditative state into a simple host, probably could use your sweater, but it's not as good for science. But the issue is you are using your intention to change the properties of materials. We have been able to take water, increase its acid-alkaline balance, its pH, by 1 full pH unit with no chemical additions. Take the same water, lower it by 1 full pH unit, no chemical additions. 1 pH unit is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If it was your blood in your veins and arteries, if you were increased to half a pH unit or decreased to half a pH unit, you'd be dead on either end.
Right.
So it's very significant. It's a factor of 10 of hydrogen ion content.
Right. And it's also an electrical concurrent to that as well, right?
And we have we've done these experiments with in vitro a liver enzyme to increase its thermodynamic activity, the chemical activity,
Mm-hmm.
and we've been able to increase it by factors of 30 just by exposing it to a conditioned space for a half an hour.
Right.
We have been able to do an in vivo experiment with fruit fly larvae. We used 10,000 larvae over time, over about a year. And the experiment was to increase the energy storage molecule, ATP, compared to its chemical precursor, ADP, that is 2 phosphorus instead of 3, in the cells of fruit fly larvae, to make the fruit fly larvae more physically fit. And if they're more physically fit, then they'll have a shorter development time to the adult fly stage. Our experimental data shows that we have been able to increase the ATP to ADP ratio by 15% with p-values better than 1 part in 1,000.
Wow.
And we've been able to reduce the larval development time to the adult fly stage by 25% with p-values better than 0.001.
And that's strictly through intention and...
Intention in the device. In that case, it was exposed to the device for its entire lifetime, 28 days, right, basically, to the adult fly stage. This is possible. Every experiment we've done, we have been able to achieve the intention. But you have to pump the space. You first have to lift the space to the higher level of reality.
And that's through meditation, because that's the phase alignment.
That's the way we have done it.
Right.
Because when you lift the space, you access another level of nature. And your experimental measurements, we have equipment, standard equipment, can begin to access it. It becomes coupled to that space.
Right.
And so we can get hard experimental data and replicated this data.
So it's not coincidence.
Not coincidence, no. We've replicated the water. That's the easy one, pH going up. We've replicated it in 10 laboratories in the U.S. and in Europe, and so there's enough data there. If orthodox science would look at the data and reflect,
right,
that's all they have to do. I mean, they're good guys, but they've lost their way. No, that's not true. They have not expanded to their fullest possibilities.
Ah.
That's what it is.
Is that because the institution, such as Stanford itself, teaches just a limited amount?
And because, yes, you can't get any of these things taught in a first-class university or a second or a third, because most of those universities depend upon funding from sources, and mostly from sources of people who are fine people, but think this stuff is crazy because they've been taught to think it's crazy.
And yet people like Edgar Mitchell is funding noetic science institutes.
Well, we started it together. Yeah. So the issue is he isn't funded. The general public funds it. The general public loves this work. It's the orthodox science community that doesn't love this work.
Is that right?
Yes.
I didn't know there was a schism there.
There is a huge schism. I mean, this is what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I know. I didn't realize the general public and
the general public love this work because they see opportunities and potential for themselves in the world, in their future.
Right.
Future doesn't look very good if you take that old sterile view of it.
That's true.
So this is humanity's future. Let me give you an example. Another example. Most people think that there's nothing in the physical vacuum. All right? Mm-hmm. Really good scientists like John Wheeler, David Bohm, and others have calculated that for today's quantum mechanics and relativity theory to be internally self-consistent, the physical vacuum which means the absence of electric atom molecule stuff, has an energy density, a latent energy density of 10 to the power 94 grams equivalent per cubic centimeter. Now, what does that mean in simpler terms? Let me look at two sums. Astronomers tell us what the average electric mass density is throughout the cosmos, all right? Astronomers tell us what is the part of the cosmos that we can see with our telescopes. It's a sphere of radius 15 billion light years. If you multiply that volume by that mass density, you get a number. It's a very big number, but let's hold it in the right hand.
Okay.
Now, on the other hand, let me take a single hydrogen atom, okay? It's a volume of, called 10 to the power minus 22. So 1 over 1 followed by 22 zeros. And I multiply that by the calculated latent energy density in the vacuum, is 10 to the power 94. I get another number, and I can compare these two now. This one is 1 trillion times this one.
Wow.
That is that the vacuum has a latent energy density beyond a fragrant of a sniff, of a whisper, of anything in this classroom, out to 15 billion light years. Nature doesn't make those kinds of mistakes.
Right.
All right?
Right. But there's also has to be a balance in nature. All nature balances out, no? So therefore the cosmos...
There ultimately will be a balance. That's thermodynamics. But you take a woman's wedding ring, the diamond, say, okay? That's not the thermodynamic equilibrium state for a diamond at room temperature and 1 atmosphere pressure. It's graphite. However, the kinetics of the process, the speed of reaction is so slow, it will take hundreds of billions of years before that diamond is gone.
Right.
That's the way it is in nature. So we have metastable states.
Oh, right.
Right. We live in a metastable state. And when we create these things with this device, we're pumping it up into a metastable state. So it allows us to access another level of reality.
And that energy...
Which I think eventually come to us in another couple of hundred years, so long as we don't blow ourselves up.
Do you think that, is that a race that we're facing right now?
It's always real, and it's a crazy world getting crazier. Yeah, if people don't do work on themselves inside and really treat each other as brothers and sisters, and it's been said many, many times,
Yeah.
what we have to do. And it's really so simple. But you have to get past your own ego. The ego is a good thing, okay? But it's usually in service to self. But if you can put your ego in service to the larger whole, then you have a chance of really contributing to the world and the growth of the world and what we can be.
And clearly if there's a time-space...
There is. It's a classroom. It's real, as much as real can be real. Okay?
Okay, should we talk about that statement? As real as much as real can be real.
Well, the issue is...
We apply meaning to
we apply meaning to it, yes.
Right.
We give meaning to things, and to us they're real.
Right. And when I don't apply meaning, then I'm put away in an institution.
Well, if you apply a meaning that's too far out of the accepted norm, especially if you're thought to be then dangerous, then you are put in an institution. And
so how
in a case, I went to Stanford as a full professor with tenure, and fortunately I had tenure. Because I'm sure I bothered a lot of people once I started doing this on the side. It wasn't my normal work. My normal work, I had to do the normal job a professor does, with integrity and all the things that go with it. But it made people uncomfortable. Okay?
Because your meaning that you applied to it was different than the Orthodox.
Well, the Orthodox had to cast it out because it couldn't possibly have meaning, because it wasn't internally self-consistent with their meaning.
Right. That's a big problem.
Okay? The real and the not real.
Well, then they would apply a label to you.
Of course.
How did you...
I suffered it.
Yes.
And they suffered me.
And how did that suffer manifest?
Well, I mean, the issue is you lose laboratory space, you don't get salary increases, things...
That happened to you?
Of course it happens.
You were...
You're naive if you think. I was naive and thought it wouldn't happen, but I realized that's a typical thing. It's a typical thing in the normal world. People get cast out of groups. Churches cast people out because they, one thing or another, you know.
And yet you've maintained this. Was there never...
Well, because I pursued the integrity of the work, doing the job right, not allowing it to slip, not allowing it to be trying not to say too ridiculous things. I'm sure when I said that we are all spirits having a physical experience, Orthodox scientists, most of them would say, oh, that's crapola.
Right.
But if I keep doing really good, reliable work, and even if it is difficult for people to replicate, let me give you an example. In Orthodox science, in theoretical, there's something called an electromagnetic gauge symmetry state. Our normal reality is called a U1 gauge. It's where there is one undetermined variable, which turns out to be the phase angle of the electron wave function. Okay, that's science speak. Theorists have said, okay, there are higher level gauge symmetry states. The next one is an SU2 state. That's where there are two things that are undetermined. One appears to be the electron wave function. The other appears to be, I think, the magnetic particle wave function. Now, magnetic monopole. Now, many, many really good scientists with lots of financial support back 20, 30 years ago, even into the 60s, have been looking for the magnetic monopole because they like the symmetry ideas between an electric charge and a magnetic charge. And they didn't find it. Never. They didn't find it. Well, it looked like one possibility at Stanford by one of the professors in physics. But it has not been found again. And because people are what they are, they think, okay, that proves there's no such thing as a magnetic monopole. It does not. It proves that you cannot access a magnetic monopole from a U1 gauge symmetry state, because all of their laboratories were at the U1 gauge symmetry state. We have lifted the laboratory by our devices to the next higher level of reality, the SU2 stage. And we see phenomena that can only be interpreted as magnetic monopoles.
Wow.
Wow.
So by lifting, this is the idea of what you say,
Yeah.
lifting space.
Conditioning the space. And so it says, you see, that what is around us is much, much more than what you see.
Right. And to get to this SU2 state,
We use consciousness.
Just consciousness.
We meditate,
through
meditate and focus on the device to imprint a specific, well-designed intention.
And it's as little as two people, and as
Little, yeah. It could be as little as one, but basically, well, perhaps. I mean, our data. I have found experimental data that no one has been able to explain it to me other than by the approach that I've suggested, the magnetic monopole, the individual magnetic charge. At this level of reality, there's only magnetic dipoles, which are positive and negative charges very close together, tightly bound together.
Right.
Yeah, there's the dipoles.
But now mathematically,
Yep.
there's models that show 11 different dimensions.
Yes, and my model of this classroom is basically comes out to be 11.
Now, are you taking mathematical models to...
I develop mathematical models, sure.
And
I mean, to do theory, I mean, that's what theory is.
Right. But are they jiving with the
they're done differently because the mathematical models of orthodox science have to be distance time related, somehow connected with that. Mine is not.
So your math separates that from?
It's another reference frame which is coupled together, so you jump to higher dimensions by that coupling.
Right.
If you don't pump it up, then it uncouples.
Wow, that's fascinating. We'd love to see the room, actually.
You won't notice anything.
You won't see it?
The issue is, I can show it to you, but generally I don't. We find that the state, I think you guys probably be all right, but only for a little while, because basically we did some healing experiments in there a long, long time ago, and we had, we'll call them consciousness type earthquakes for 6 months. The events that created healings in the space indicated the space itself had become conscious in a way.
Wow, the space itself conscious.
Yeah, because, and you can say that here we have this space, but within this space is another space, and within that space is another space, and within that, so they're all in the same space, except you can't access them
Because
unless you do something special.
change my infrastructure with
Yeah.
my unconscious
Yes.
bit process.
Yes.
So then, now take me to time then. If time doesn't, I'm perceiving it as a linear unrolling.
Right.
Uh,
And it's not.
It's not. I can jump then into any...
Well, it appears. I mean, let's be clear. I haven't done all those experiments yet. I just said something to get your attention, but I don't really.
Oh, well, it worked.
I haven't done enough work to back it up. This is why I think orthodox science might tolerate me, because I back it up ultimately with experimental data.
Right.
And therefore I don't speak much about it until there's experimental data. I write it in the white papers on my website because I can explain things that orthodox science can't explain.
Right.
And people need to know, even if orthodox science doesn't understand, because people need to know that there's so much more. I mean, that's really the issue. That's what this is all about.
Well, yeah, now talk to me about that responsibility. Why do people need to know if there is an unconscious...
Because they need to know they're more than just meat.
Right.
They need to give things meaning. They need to build themselves. They need to consciously focus.
Technically, won't that happen if we pump up the space? Then everyone in that space all bolts rise on the
Well,
line?
there will be that space, but will they be in it?
Wow.
They may not. That space may be the graduation reference frame, the other classroom that's being prepared.
Is this the whole Left Behind book series that I'd never read?
It's more a matter of the heart rather than a matter of
Well, it would seem to me that
information.
as fear begets fear, that's creating a space.
and that's one space that I don't like living in.
Yeah.
Right.
So then, so the idea of that, the responsibility of going out and letting the people know that this...
And the point is, it's up to us.
Right.
We can create. We are the ultimately, we are the creators. When I say become co-creators, I mean ultimately, way down the road, we spin planets out of ourselves. That's what a creator. I mean, every act we do in life is an act of creation, but teeny acts of creation.
Right.
And that's what the adventure is all about, to learn to become a creator, a co-creator. And you guys are doing that.
Right.
You're creating information. Information actually is equal to negative entropy, which means you are reducing the disorder in this world. And in so doing, you're restoring some of the potential to this world. And when you do it to yourself inside that infrastructure, then you lift this world.
Oh. Well, that feels good.
Yeah.
But then the frustration of your fellow scientists and Orthodox.
They will change eventually.
They will.
Oh, of course. I mean,
They don't have to get this information, then do all
They-
this eternal work, and
because some of them will.
some of them will.
Some will become more awake, and there'll be a lot of people in the general community. But in general, okay, the general public pays for all the research in any nation out of their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So when the general public really see how important this is, they will demand of the government that the monies distributed for science, that they start looking in this direction in a very serious way. That'll happen.
Wow. Can I do that now?
Yes, if you can mobilize enough people and
Congressman?
and exactly, you lobby it. I mean, this is ultimately the way things change in this particular world. So yes, what you're creating,
Right.
if you excite so many people, lots and lots of people to say, hey, gee, that's me, and that's important.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what the bleep did.
Yeah.
There were various errors and such in there, but it was a real sociological phenomenon.
Yeah, it really was.
So, and that helped a lot of people. Now, a lot of people wrote to me saying, oh boy, I want to study quantum mechanics because it does this. And I had to tell them, quantum mechanics can't do that, but you can go ahead and study.
Right.
I have one last question.
Okay.
And then maybe we move and look at the room.
Yeah.
But a word that you used several times, and I'm struck that maybe it would be nice to have you define the word,
Mhm.
and that's integrity.
Yeah.
You know, you said,
Integrity is being true to self.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can I start one more time?
Integrity is being true to self.
Right.
To radiate what you are to the world and have reflected back from the world. And you look at it and you try to be true, honorable, honest, but that's integrity.
To yourself.
To yourself. And if you're wrong, you will find out.
And yet the science experiments have integrity.
The science experiments have integrity
To itself of the
to
experiments?
itself of the experiments.
Right.
And if you can replicate, then that expands the integrity, etc. And so now it's hard to replicate the experiments because people have to, either we have to provide the device that will condition the space, and then people can do the experiment. And that part's been done. But the next part is the people changing within themselves
Right.
and become pumper-uppers and really start to transform themselves. Then they will expand their integrity, so long as they're honorable with respect to it. They're not trying to fool anyone. You're not trying to make huge profit out of something that's bogus,
Right.
etc.
But then if I have a relative truth,
Yes,
doesn't that allow me to shift that honorability?
of course it always is.
Right.
But your integrity is, if you go deep within yourself, what's true.
Right.
I mean, the reason that I decided to give up being department chair and walk down this path and make a kind of break was I had to be true to myself because I believed that this other stuff was really important for humanity. And I had to be true to myself because that's the prime dictum for every one of us. To thine own self be true. That's it.
That's it.
It really
Regardless
is.
of whether truth is
Regardless. Because that's where you are, and you have to honor that. And if you accept the fact that you're still growing and you're still learning, you're going to make some mistakes. And just accept it. Because that's who you are
Fantastic.
at that point in time.
That's a great place to stop.
Right there, we can end
Okay.
that.
All right.